In the year 601 AD, Pope Gregory I wrote a letter, not a sermon, not a decree, a strategic memo. The recipient was an abbot named Mellitus, who was travelling to England to oversee the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons. And in that letter, Gregory gave him an instruction so specific, so calculated, that historians have been debating its implications for 1400 years. He said, "Do not destroy the pagan temples, destroy the idols inside them. Sprinkle holy water, build an altar, place relics, and let the people continue coming to the same place they have always come, so that," and this is the exact language preserved by the monk Bede, "they may come together in their customary places in a more friendly spirit." That letter still exists. It is not a theory. It is in the Vatican archives, in Bede's Ecclesiastical history, in every serious account of early Christian expansion in Northern Europe. The Church did not stumble onto pagan sacred sites. It chose them, deliberately, systematically. And then it built on top of them and stopped asking what was underneath. Here is the question that letter raises, and that almost nobody has followed to its end. If the ground was chosen because it was already considered sacred, and if the buildings placed on that ground all share geometric and astronomical properties that predate Christianity by thousands of years, what exactly is the ground remembering? And why does every major cathedral in Europe seem to be built on top of the same shape? Start with Chartres, 80 kilometers southwest of Paris, one of the most studied buildings in the world, an UNESCO World Heritage Site. If you ask why Chartres Cathedral was built where it was, you'll get the standard answer. It was the seat of a bishop, it was near important pilgrimage routes, the people of the town funded the construction after a fire in 1194, and the architecture that resulted was so impressive that it defined Gothic style for the next 2 centuries. That is all true, and it tells you almost nothing about why that hill specifically has been treated as sacred for longer than Christianity has existed. Julius Caesar mentioned the Carnutes tribe in his account of the Gallic Wars. He recorded that this Celtic people, whose territory included the land around Chartres, held a great annual assembly of Druids. The Druids believed this particular location was a place where spiritual energy rose directly from the earth. They worshipped at underground grottos and a sacred spring. They built a well. That well still exists. It is 33 meters below the floor of the Gothic cathedral, in the lowest level of the crypt. You can visit it on a guided tour. The tour guides will tell you about the Christian martyrs said to have been thrown into it by Roman soldiers. They will not usually tell you that the well predates Christianity, that it dates to the Gallo-Roman period at minimum, and that the crypt surrounding it contains walls from at least 5 distinct construction phases, each built directly on top of whatever came before. Before the Carnutes arrived, there was something even older at Chartres. An unknown pre-Celtic civilization built a dolmen on that hill, 2 massive upright stones with a covering slab, and a well. Nobody built that dolmen by accident. Nobody digs a well on top of a hill unless they believe the hill has a reason to be a centre of things. Now here is the part that does not appear in any guidebook. At noon on the summer solstice, sunlight enters Chartres Cathedral through a specific pin set in a specific stained glass window, travels the length of the nave, and strikes a single white stone set into the floor with mathematical precision. This is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a solar calendar. A gnomon, the same mechanism used in sundials for millennia, built into the fabric of a Gothic church constructed in 1220 AD. The window, the pin, and the floor marker had to be designed in deliberate geometric relationship to each other and to the exact angle of the sun on the longest day of the year. Somebody calculated that, and the cathedral's main axis doesn't even face east, which was standard Christian orientation. It faces northeast, toward the summer solstice sunrise, preserving an astronomical alignment that almost certainly predates the structure above it. The people who built Chartres Cathedral knew that ground was special. They kept the well, they preserved the crypt. They aligned the building to the sun the way the site had apparently always been aligned to the sun. And then they added flying buttresses and stained glass and 176 windows, and the question of what they built on top of became a footnote. Go 80 kilometers northeast to Paris, to the island in the Seine where Notre Dame has stood since 1163. Beneath the plaza in front of the cathedral, there is an archaeological crypt you can visit. It contains Roman construction from the 1st century AD. It contains evidence of the Parisii, the Celtic tribe who settled this island in the Seine around 250 BCE and whose name eventually became the name of the city. In 1710, during construction work beneath the cathedral itself, workers found the Pillar of the Boatman, a carved stone column erected in the 1st century AD by the boatmen of the Parisii, depicting both Roman and Celtic deities side by side. It is now in the Cluny Museum, about 500 metres from the cathedral. The inscription dedicates it to Jupiter and to Emperor Tiberius. It is the oldest known monument in Paris. It was found directly beneath one of the most famous Christian buildings in the world. The question of whether a Roman Jupiter temple stood on the island before the cathedral is officially unresolved. The archaeological excavations conducted beneath Notre Dame have uncovered approximately 1/3 of the available subterranean space. The remaining 2/3 have never been formally imaged. The technology to do so exists. Ground-penetrating radar, the same technology used to find hidden chambers in Egyptian pyramids, could map the full foundation in a matter of weeks. Nobody has funded that survey. What we do know is that the island was a Celtic sacred site, then a Roman sacred site, then a Merovingian Christian church called Saint Etienne, constructed in the 4th or 5th century, then a Romanesque remodelling of that church, then in 1163 the first stones of Notre Dame. 5 distinct sacred structures stacked vertically over 18 centuries on the same island at the same spot. And we have investigated the top 3. Now extend the pattern outward. Not one site, all of them. The Pantheon in Rome was a Roman pagan temple built under Emperor Hadrian around 120 AD. In 609 AD, Pope Boniface IV converted it into a Christian church dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It is still an active Catholic church today. The original pagan structure was not demolished and replaced. It was reconsecrated. The dome, the portico, the rotunda, pagan architecture, repurposed, intact. The Parthenon in Athens became a Christian church in the late 6th century AD. Canterbury Cathedral sits on a Roman sacred site. Westminster Abbey occupies ground that, before the Norman conquest, held a church, and before that church a Roman structure, and before that Roman structure evidence of pre-Roman ritual use. This is not coincidence. It is, as Gregory's letter makes explicit, official policy. But policy alone doesn't explain the geometry. In 2014, a paper published in the peer-reviewed Nexus Network Journal analysed French Gothic cathedrals using fractal geometry, the mathematics of self-similar patterns that repeat across scale. The researchers were not looking for mystical alignments. They were looking for structural patterns that might explain design consistency across buildings with different architects separated by centuries. What they found was that French Gothic cathedrals share a non-random fractal parameter. Not individually, collectively. Cathedrals built by different master builders in different centuries in different regions converge on the same geometric relationships. A separate study analysed more than 500 Gothic steeples across Europe and found that every single one uses one of only 6 specific geometries derived from exponential powers of the golden ratio. Every one. That information, the paper notes, was essentially lost for 500 years after Gothic construction ended. What this means is that the builders were working from a shared geometric vocabulary that predates the buildings themselves. A vocabulary encoded in the sites before the first Gothic stone was ever laid. Chartres encodes the golden ratio in its nave proportions, its labyrinth diameter, its rose window. The labyrinth at Chartres, 12.89 meters in diameter, still on the floor, mirrors the diameter of the west rose window almost exactly. Those two measurements were not accidental, and they were not arrived at independently. They were inherited. But from where? And why does this same geometric inheritance show up not just at Chartres, not just in France, but on a line stretching from the western coast of Ireland to the eastern coast of Israel? The line has a name in the scholarship, the St. Michael-Apollo axis. French academic Jean Richet documented it in 1967. His brother Julian extended the analysis in 1977.
The line connects, in near-perfect geometric alignment, Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland, a remote rock in the Atlantic where monks built a monastery in the 7th century, to St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, which connects to the mainland only at low tide, to Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, the same to the Sacra di San Michele in northern Italy, to Monte Sant'Angelo on the Adriatic coast, across the Mediterranean to Mount Carmel in Israel. 7 major sacred sites, each built on elevated, isolated terrain, each dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel in the Christian era, each sitting on documented pre-Christian sacred ground, each aligned on a single axis that crosses 3,000 kilometers of Europe. Astrophysicist Luca Amendola noted in 2016 that this axis follows a geometric path, a loxodrome at 60 degrees, that could have been calculated using surveying technology available in antiquity. And the 3 most prominent sites on this line, Mont Saint-Michel, Sacra di San Michele, and Monte Sant'Angelo, are not just aligned. They are equidistant from each other. This is documented. It is in published academic papers. It is not in any mainstream documentary about these sites. Each site has its own origin story, its own local history, its own miracle accounts explaining why St. Michael appeared there. None of those accounts explain why the sites are geometrically arranged on a continental scale. Here is what none of the official explanations account for. The pattern at each of these sites is identical. An elevated landform and a hill, an island, a cliff, treated as sacred before recorded history, maintained as sacred through multiple civilizations and religions, then capped with a Christian structure that preserves the original orientation without anyone formally acknowledging the inheritance. The well at Chartres, the Jupiter pillar at Notre Dame, the pre-Norman sacred ground at Canterbury, the pre-Christian hilltops along the Michael axis. In each case, the Church followed Gregory's 601 AD instruction: do not destroy, convert, allow the people to come to the place they have always come. And the people did. And they still do. The tourists photographing Notre Dame from the plaza are standing above an unexcavated Roman foundation. The pilgrims walking the Chartres labyrinth are tracing a geometric figure that predates the cathedral above them by at least one previous structure, and possibly by the Druidic assembly ground that predates that. The hikers who reach Mont Saint-Michel at low tide are walking to a tidal island that was sacred long before anyone named it after an archangel. Nobody suppressed any of this. Gregory's letter is in the public record. The Chartres solstice alignment is physically observable on any June 21st at noon. The Pillar of the Boatman is in a museum 500 meters from Notre Dame. The fractal geometry paper is in an academic journal that anyone with internet access can read. What has not happened is the systematic question, not of any individual site, but of the pattern across all of them. What were the original builders of these elevated sacred places encoding into the ground, and why does the mathematical geometry they chose persist through every subsequent civilization that arrived, converted, and built on top? The church didn't erase what was there. It said so in writing in 601 AD. It kept the wells and the hills and the astronomical alignments and the proportions. It added altars and relics and saints' names. And then, for 14 centuries, it stopped asking why those particular proportions, those particular hills, those particular alignments had been considered worth preserving in the first place. The letter that explains how this happened is in the Vatican archives. The ground that contains the answer is underneath the cathedrals, and we have only excavated 1/3 of the available space. The rest is still there, waiting beneath the floor, while the tourists photograph the stained glass, and the docents explain the flying buttresses, and the 33-metre well at Chartres sits in the dark below the crypt, open, cold, and full of something nobody has yet agreed to name.